Script. The bank that nobody noticed. Ripple's quiet infiltration of the global financial system. Target. 3,200 words, 20 minutes. 8 seconds. That is how long it took a Canadian bank to send $1,000 from Calgary, Alberta, to a bank in Germany. Not 2 to 6 business days, not overnight. 8 seconds. With a receiving fee of €1. Settlement confirmed. Money arrived. Done. And nobody noticed. That transaction, live, on stage, in front of an audience, using Ripple's infrastructure, happened between two real financial institutions. A Canadian bank with $43 billion in assets, a German bank called Rise Bank. Real money, real settlement, real confirmation received on the administrative dashboard in the time it takes to read this sentence out loud. But here's what makes this more than a demo. That Canadian bank is not some regional credit union running a blockchain experiment. The signals that have been quietly surfacing, in official confirmations, in central bank pilot programs, in institutional partnership documents that almost nobody has connected into a single picture, point to something that is not a pilot anymore. It is infrastructure, already installed, already running, already confirmed by some of the most systemically important financial institutions in the world. And the market has not priced any of it. Welcome back. I'm the calm analyst. No hype, no speculation, just the structure that is already there if you know where to look. Let's pull back the curtain. Let me start with the hard truth that the crowd consistently gets wrong about institutional adoption. Retail investors look for announcements. They look for press releases. They look for a CEO going on CNBC and saying the name XRP. They look for a tweet, a partnership headline, a price movement that confirms what they already believe. And when those things don't come in the exact form they expect, they conclude that nothing is happening. But here is how institutions actually operate. They do not announce infrastructure decisions. They build them quietly, test them privately, review them legally, integrate them carefully, and then, only after years of that process, does the public confirmation surface in a form that even a careful observer can catch. And when it does surface, it is almost never in plain language. It is in the vocabulary of infrastructure, distributed ledger technology, DLT rails, ledger-based settlement, tokenized asset networks, generic language, deliberately generic. Because institutions at this level do not brand their infrastructure to the technology vendor, they reference the technology layer. And Ripple has spent years positioning itself as exactly that, not a crypto company, but a financial infrastructure provider. The kind that shows up inside institutional systems without a logo on it. That is why when you look at official documents, bank presentations, and regulatory filings from some of the most important financial institutions in the world, you rarely see the word Ripple written in large letters, but you see the fingerprints everywhere. Today, I am going to show you where those fingerprints are, and when you see them all together, the picture that emerges is not ambiguous. Let's run the math on what this infrastructure actually represents, because the numbers here are not small. The Royal Bank of Canada is not just any institution. It is the largest bank in Canada, one of the most systemically important financial institutions in North America. A bank of that size and that regulatory standing does not casually test payment infrastructure. Compliance costs alone make casual experimentation prohibitively expensive. When an institution at that level builds a system, it builds a system it intends to use at scale. In Ripple's own official documentation, confirmed directly, not speculated, the Royal Bank of Canada is named as one of 7 core banks helping build Ripple's governance structure alongside Bank of America Merrill Lynch, CIBC Canada, Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, the 4th largest bank in the world, Santander Group, Standard Chartered, and Westpac Australia. 7 banks. 7 of the most important financial institutions across North America, Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. Chosen deliberately for global geographic spread. Chosen to provide input from different markets and different regulatory environments. Ask yourself this brutal question. Why would Bank of America, the Royal Bank of Canada, Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, and Santander simultaneously align with the same infrastructure company if they were not planning to use it for something significant? They would not. Institutions at that level do not participate in governance structures for technology they do not intend to deploy. They do not allocate legal resources, compliance review, and senior executive time to projects that are experiments. They position when they have certainty. And 7 of the world's most important banks participating in the governance of Ripple's network is not a signal of curiosity, it is a signal of commitment. Now add the cross-border payment math. The global cross-border payment market processes approximately $150 trillion annually. Current settlement on the corridors these banks operate across takes 2 to 6 business days. The friction cost, correspondent banking fees, foreign exchange spread, nostro and vostro pre-funding, extracts billions of dollars from that flow every year. Ripple's infrastructure demonstrated 8-second settlement with near zero friction on that exact corridor. Canada to Germany. 2 real banks, $1,000, 8 seconds. Even capturing a fraction of 1% of $150 trillion in annual cross-border volume through infrastructure that settles in 8 seconds instead of 6 days represents a transaction throughput that would dwarf anything the XRP ledger has processed in its history. And the banks that would route that volume through these rails are already in the governance structure. The math is not complicated, the scale is. Now let me stack the institutional evidence, because the Royal Bank of Canada confirmation is one layer of a much deeper structure. Canada just completed its first tokenized bond pilot. This was not a startup running a proof of concept. This involved the Bank of Canada, the central bank, alongside several major commercial banks. The explicit goal was to test how blockchain technology could be used in traditional bond markets. Why bonds specifically? Because bond settlement currently takes multiple days. Tokenization can reduce that to near instant finality. And when a central bank tests that infrastructure, it is not conducting academic research. It is studying how its own financial markets will operate in a future that is already being designed. Central banks do not launch tokenization pilots because they are curious about crypto. They launch them because they are preparing for a transition they believe is inevitable. The Bank of Canada running this pilot alongside commercial banks, at the same moment Ripple's confirmed partnership with the Royal Bank of Canada surfaces, is not a coincidence. These are parallel tracks of the same preparation. And the language matters. In the tokenized bond pilot documentation, in the central bank research papers, in the institutional presentations, you will not find the word Ripple written prominently. You will find phrases like distributed ledger technology, ledger-based settlement, DLT infrastructure. That language is intentional. Institutions reference the technology layer rather than the brand. It keeps the focus on the infrastructure. And Ripple's technology stack fits precisely into that infrastructure category, built specifically for cross-border settlement, institutional liquidity, and tokenized financial assets. Then look at BlackRock. BlackRock recently limited redemptions in one of its private credit funds as outflows increased. That is a liquidity event. Private credit has grown rapidly over the last decade, and when redemption pressure spikes, funds must slow withdrawals to manage capital. Events like that one do not happen in isolation. They push institutions, all institutions, to rethink how financial markets move liquidity. Faster settlement, more transparent asset movement, better infrastructure for global value transfer. That is not a problem that gets solved by adding more people to the back office. That is a problem that gets solved by replacing the settlement infrastructure entirely. And sitting quietly at the center of that replacement conversation, confirmed by 7 of the world's most important banks, tested in live cross-border transactions, integrated into central bank tokenization research, is Ripple. Let me bring in the TCS Quartz Gateway piece, because this is where the infrastructure depth becomes almost impossible to overstate. TCS Banks powers 2 of the world's largest core banking implementations. The State Bank of India alone processes over 400 million transactions per day on this network. TCS Capital Market Solutions record 10 million trades per day at peak, covering approximately $40 trillion in securities annually across more than 100 countries. That is not a pilot. That is the live beating heart of institutional finance in multiple major economies. And inside the TCS Quartz Gateway flowchart, the architecture diagram for how this system connects to external networks, Ripple is documented as a public blockchain platform in the integration layer. Think about what that means structurally. The infrastructure processing $40 trillion in securities per year across more than 100 countries has Ripple mapped into its architecture, not as a future consideration, as a current documented integration point. Engineers build those diagrams based on what is actually wired in, not what might be wired in someday. Add the DTCC. The DTCC's own patent filing names Ripple's network explicitly in the bridge routing example as one of the ledger systems in the routing graph for digital liquidity tokens. The DTCC has already added Hidden Road Partners, a firm Ripple acquired, to its back-end infrastructure. The pipe between the XRP ledger and the entity that processes the majority of U.S. security settlement is not being proposed. It is already installed. The pattern is unmistakable once you see it. DTCC infrastructure, Ripple integrated. TCS Bank's capital markets, Ripple documented. Bank of Canada tokenization pilot, same moment RBC Ripple confirmation surfaces. 7 of the world's largest banks in Ripple's governance structure. $40 trillion in securities annually on infrastructure with Ripple in the architecture. This is not a company being considered for the financial system of the future. This is a company already wired into the financial system of today, quietly, without the logo, in the language of infrastructure rather than the language of crypto. Let me address the bear case directly, because rational analysis requires it. Ethereum holds approximately 60% of real-world asset tokenization activity today. The EVM developer ecosystem is deeper. The institutional familiarity with Ethereum tooling is higher. Stellar is named in the DTCC patent alongside Ripple. Bitcoin and Ethereum appear in the TCS Quartz Gateway architecture. Swift is also integrating blockchain infrastructure. JP Morgan's Onyx platform is already processing institutional flows. Visa and MasterCard are building agent payment frameworks. This is a competitive landscape. It will not be a winner-take-all outcome. Multiple chains, multiple companies, multiple infrastructure layers will participate in the tokenization of global finance. But here is the structural distinction that matters. Ripple is not competing for the retail market. It is not trying to be the chain with the most NFTs or the most DeFi protocols or the most developer hackathon participants. It is competing for one specific and enormously valuable corridor: institutional cross-border settlement and tokenized financial asset infrastructure. And in that specific corridor, its combination of 8-second finality, sub-cent transaction costs, confirmed governance relationships with 7 of the world's most important banks, and documented integration into DTCC and TCS Quartz infrastructure represents a competitive position that no other blockchain company has assembled. The pie being divided here is $150 trillion in annual cross-border payments, $100 trillion in DTCC targeted tokenization, $40 trillion in TCS processed securities. Ethereum winning 60% of the retail RWA market does not close the door on Ripple capturing institutional settlement infrastructure at a scale that is fundamentally different from anything the XRP ledger has processed before. These are not the same competition. They are different corridors of the same transition. Here's what I want you to take away from everything we have covered today. A Canadian bank with $43 billion in assets sent $1,000 to Germany in 8 seconds. Live. On stage. Confirmed on the administrative dashboard in real time. Using Ripple's infrastructure. The Royal Bank of Canada, the largest bank in Canada, is confirmed as one of 7 core governance banks for Ripple's network alongside Bank of America, Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, Santander, Standard Chartered, CIBC, and Westpac. The Bank of Canada is running tokenized bond pilots at the same moment that confirmation surfaces. Ripple is documented in the TCS Quartz Gateway architecture that processes $40 trillion in securities annually. Hidden Road, acquired by Ripple, is now integrated into DTCC backend infrastructure. BlackRock is experiencing liquidity pressure in private credit markets at the same moment that blockchain settlement infrastructure is being positioned as the structural solution. None of these signals are being discussed together in mainstream crypto media. Each one gets a headline in isolation. But the picture they form when connected is not one of a technology being tested. It is one of a technology being deployed. Quietly, methodically, in the language of infrastructure rather than the language of crypto. By institutions that do not gamble, Do not experiment with systems they do not intend to use, and do not put companies into their governance structures without expecting to build with them at scale. The market has not priced this. The retail conversation is still focused on short-term price movement and regulatory headlines. But the 7 banks in Ripple's governance structure, the central banks running tokenization pilots, the clearinghouses integrating DLT infrastructure, they are not watching the price chart. They are building the system that the price will eventually reflect. The biggest signals always show up quietly first. The loudest confirmation is always last. Comment infrastructure below if you made it through this entire analysis. I want to see who is reading the architecture, not just reacting to the chart. Stay patient, stay rational. 8 seconds. Canada to Germany. Real money, real settlement. The system is already running. The market just hasn't looked at the dashboard yet. We don't wait for the future, we plan for it.